A quiet suburban neighborhood lies still under the blanket of night. The air is heavy, and somewhere in the distance, sirens wail, their echoes bouncing off empty streets. Inside a well-kept house, a man's phone rings, breaking the silence. He answers, expecting the usual, but his face goes pale. The voice on the other end delivers a blow that knocks the wind out of him. His wife is dead. His hands tremble. The phone nearly slips. He looks around at the family photos on the wall, those smiling faces now mocking him. How did this happen? How did everything unravel so fast? Little does he know, this is just the beginning of a nightmare he never saw coming. They were the kind of family that seemed to have it all, a picture-perfect life that everyone in the neighborhood admired. The husband, Mark, was the steady anchor, a man who worked tirelessly to provide the best for his loved ones. He had a quiet strength about him, the type of man who believed in loyalty, in building a life brick by brick. His smile was warm, his laughter genuine, and his love for his family unshakable. Beside him was Claire, his beautiful wife, the heart of their home. Claire had a way of lighting up every room she walked into. She was vibrant, compassionate, and fiercely protective of her family. She adored Mark in ways that made her friends envious. To the outside world, Claire was a devoted wife and a doting mother, the kind who never missed a soccer game or a parent-teacher conference. Her love seemed endless, wrapping around her family like a comforting embrace. And then there was James, Claire's teenage son from her first marriage. To Mark, James was not just a stepson. He was his own, no questions asked. He had watched James grow from a shy boy into a young man, guiding him through the awkward phases of adolescence. The bond they shared was more than just a father-son relationship. It was a friendship built on trust and mutual respect. Mark was the dad who showed up at every game, who knew James's friends by name, who gave advice like they were secrets only he could share. Their weekends were filled with laughter and togetherness. They spent lazy Sundays making pancakes in the kitchen, the scent of maple syrup and laughter filling the house. They had movie nights where they all crammed onto the couch, fighting over popcorn and quoting lines from their favorite films. Summers were for road trips, late-night bonfires, and long talks about dreams and the future. They were a unit, a team, with plans and dreams that seemed untouchable. Their life wasn't just good. It was extraordinary in its simplicity, in the way they truly enjoyed each other's company. They were the family that took annual holiday photos, dressed in matching sweaters, capturing moments that Claire carefully framed and hung on their walls. To anyone looking in, they were the ideal blend of love, laughter, and a bit of chaos that made a house a home. Their dreams were intertwined. A future where James went off to college, Mark and Claire grew old together, watching their grandkids play in the backyard. But beneath that perfect surface, tiny cracks had begun to form. Cracks that no one could see, not even Mark. In his eyes, his family was unbreakable, solid as a rock. He had no idea that the life he'd built with his own two hands was about to crumble into a pile of dust. No clue that the person he trusted most was hiding a secret that would rip their lives apart in the most brutal way imaginable. It all started so innocently, just a chance meeting that should have meant nothing. Claire first met him when James brought his friend Ethan over for a weekend study session. Ethan was charming in that carefree way that most young men are, with a smile that held just the right mix of confidence and curiosity. Claire barely noticed him at first, just another teenager sitting at her kitchen table, laughing too loudly and eating too much of her homemade cookies. But then, something changed. It was in the way he looked at her, longer than he should have, eyes lingering like he was seeing her for the first time. It wasn't just a passing glance. It was a spark that leapt from his eyes to hers, something she hadn't felt in years, a feeling she thought had been buried under the routine of marriage and motherhood. It was thrilling, dangerous, and for a moment she felt like a woman again, not just a wife or a mom. She told herself it was nothing, just a fleeting thought, a silly distraction. But that look stayed with her. And the next time Ethan came over, their eyes met again, and this time, it was deliberate. It wasn't long before those stolen glances turned into fleeting touches. His hand brushing against hers as they passed in the kitchen, his shoulder grazing hers when they stood too close. Little things that might not have meant much to anyone else, but to Claire, they were electric. She started looking forward to those moments when Ethan was around, the way he made her feel like the world was spinning faster. Their first real encounter happened on a quiet afternoon when James wasn't home. Ethan had stopped by unexpectedly, under the guise of looking for his friend, but they both knew James wasn't there. The tension in the room was thick, every word they spoke laced with something unspoken. And then, almost without thinking, Claire reached out, her hand trembling as it touched his. That touch was like the opening of floodgates. Suddenly, all the restraint, all the logic and reason disappeared. They gave in to the pull that had been growing between them, a pull they both knew was wrong but couldn't resist. Their affair became a whirlwind of secrecy and desire, a series of hidden moments stolen in the dark. They met in places no one would suspect, quiet corners of the park, empty parking lots, and sometimes when the risk became part of the thrill, even in the house while Mark and James were away. Every touch, every kiss was charged with the thrill of getting caught, with the danger that made their hearts race faster than they ever had before. Claire knew what she was risking, knew what this could do to her family, but in those moments with Ethan, none of that seemed to matter. She felt alive in a way she hadn't in years, like the life she thought was slipping away from her was suddenly burning bright again. For Ethan, it was more than just the excitement of the forbidden. It was about possessing something that wasn't his to have, a twisted game that he couldn't stop playing. They both knew the stakes were high, that the lies they were telling couldn't stay hidden forever. But they were addicted to the rush, to the danger, to the taste of something they could never truly call theirs. As the affair deepened, the lies they told to cover it up became more intricate, more dangerous. Claire's guilt started to gnaw at her, but not enough to make her stop. Not yet. She was in too deep, trapped in a web she had helped weave, not realizing that every thread she spun was pulling her closer to the point of no return. The point where secrets unravel and consequences come crashing down like a wave that cannot be stopped. Mark started to notice the small things first. Claire, who once laughed at his silly jokes, now seemed distant, her smiles forced and hollow. She'd always been so open, sharing every detail of her day, but now there were gaps in her stories, pauses that felt too long. She began taking calls in the other room, her voice hushed, her laughter muted in a way that sent a chill down his spine. When he asked who it was, she'd brush it off. Just a friend, she'd say, or work stuff, nothing important. Late nights at the grocery store or sudden errands that couldn't wait became more frequent. She'd come home hours later than she said, her excuses sounding more like rehearsed lines. Mark's gut twisted with doubt, but he forced himself to ignore it, telling himself he was overthinking. After all, this was Claire, the woman he'd built his life with. He tried to convince himself that everything was fine, that it was just stress or a phase. But deep down, the nagging feeling wouldn't go away, whispering that something was very, very wrong. Little did he know, the storm was already brewing, and he was about to be caught in its path. The confrontation erupted like a volcano, an explosion of pent-up rage and betrayal. Mark had finally tracked Ethan down, his heart pounding with a mix of fury and despair. The moment he laid eyes on the young man, everything inside him snapped. All the pain, all the confusion morphed into a singular focus. He had to make Ethan pay. Mark lunged forward, fists clenched, words choking in his throat. "You think you can just take my wife? My family?" His voice was a low growl, primal and fierce, as he pushed Ethan against the wall, the air thick with tension. Ethan's surprise quickly turned to fear, his bravado fading as he realized the man before him was a storm unleashed. In a flurry of emotions, the fight escalated. Mark felt himself drowning in a haze of anger, his vision narrowing to the boy who had shattered his world. With every punch he threw, he was not just hitting Ethan, he was striking at the very heart of his shattered dreams, of everything he held dear. Blood spilled, a stark reminder of the violence erupting from his heart. In that moment, the weight of his actions began to dawn on him, but it was too late. The rush of adrenaline drowned out the warnings, and Mark couldn't stop. The final blow landed with a sickening thud, and silence fell like a heavy curtain. Mark stepped back, breathing heavily, his heart racing. He looked down, horror creeping in as he realized the irreversible nature of what he had done. The reality hit him with crushing force. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was a murder. A point of no return that would haunt him forever. Conclude with reflections on the tragedy. The husband is left to grapple with the consequences of his choices. Pose questions about love, betrayal, and the fragility of trust. End with a somber note, encouraging viewers to consider the depths of human emotion and the tragic paths it can lead us down. In the quiet aftermath, Mark stood alone, the weight of his actions crashing down like a tidal wave. The silence felt deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos that had just unfolded. He was left to grapple with the reality of what he had done, an irreversible decision that shattered not just one life, but many. The man he had confronted was not just a lover. He was a reflection of Mark's own failings, a reminder of the trust that had been broken and the love that had turned toxic. Questions spiraled in Mark's mind like a relentless storm. How had it come to this? Where had he gone wrong? Love had once been a sanctuary, a bond he thought unbreakable, but betrayal had turned it into a battleground. Trust, once so solid, had crumbled into dust, leaving only regret in its wake. He realized that beneath the surface of love lies a fragile balance, easily tipped by jealousy, betrayal, and unfulfilled desires. Mark was haunted by the faces of his family, the laughter of his wife, the joy of his stepson, now marred by his actions. The tragedy of their lives played over and over in his mind, a haunting reminder that human emotions can lead us down dark paths. In the end, it wasn't just a murder that had occurred. It was the death of a family, the death of love, and the birth of a haunting regret that would follow him forever. The story serves as a somber reflection on how easily passion can turn to destruction, urging us all to confront the depths of our emotions before they consume us.